I don't usually talk about this, but growing up, I used to hear scratching sounds on the wall at night. The TV would randomly turn on. Sometimes pencils would fall off my desk whilst I was studying for no reason. And there was a feeling like someone was in the room watching. Not just once, again and again. I remember even telling people I thought a girl was living in our apartment, but no one else saw her. No one believed me. And honestly, I started questioning myself too. Hello and welcome to my YouTube video, or welcome back if you're familiar with my content. My name is Strange. I teach psychology online for the last 10 years, and before that I was teaching at university as well. But parallel to that, I was exploring spirituality and mystical and paranormal phenomena. I was deeply ingrained into parapsychology. That's what you can call, or anything like transpersonal psychology, which means experiences beyond what we can perceive with our human senses. All this was my fascination for years. But there is a reason why it became my fascination. This is because I was growing up in households where things were happening, things that we call paranormal. And for many years, I didn't really talk about it because if you position yourself as a research psychologist, professional psychologist, and whatever, then of course it's difficult to talk about things that nobody can prove, I guess, because we are all after some kind of evidence, right? So this time I decided to start actually talking about my personal experiences, because these experiences directed the whole journey of mine, how I was exploring spirituality and eventually religion, and how I try to find the truth by exploring different paths. So here is the story when I was living in an apartment when I was about 10 or 11. First of all, what I remember in that apartment, that at that time, for the first time, I watched a horror movie which just came out, which is called Child's Play, with a Chucky, the doll that was dangerous to society, let's say. So it was doing all kinds of things. I just don't want to say too much on YouTube, just in case the YouTube doesn't like that word. But you know what I'm talking about, and you probably have seen that movie. The thing is, in those times where I was growing up in Kazakhstan, I would say there was no strict laws about not leaving children at home alone, not showing them certain movies, and that includes paranormal movies, which should be like 18 plus. But at that point, this all was quite new to us. Videos and everything, even internet wasn't there yet. We had videotapes at that time, so that was a videotape that we played at home. And interestingly enough, someone gave me a doll for my birthday, which had blue hair and it was quite big, and they put it in my room on the bookcase, and I could see that doll sitting there every night when I was going to sleep. Needless to say, I had nightmares like every night after closing my eyes. I saw that doll in my nightmares. Looking back, I'm thinking actually it was more like the negative spirits that were living already in the house were using that to their advantage, that my vulnerable state when I was sleeping as a child, they would get into my dreams and they would disturb me even more. And I remember at some point, a couple of years later, I wanted to go to sleep after I would read my favorite book. And I loved reading books, and I started reading them really early. So at the age of 12, more or less, I was going to sleep, and I was alone in the room, in the bedroom. And in fact, in our apartment was only my dad, and he was sleeping in a different room, quite far away from my room. I didn't have any neighbors from either side, and that was a top floor, so there was no neighbors above me either. As I got ready to go to sleep, I put the book down and I switched off the light. Suddenly, I started hearing some kind of scratching on the wall. Literally like somebody was scratching the wall next to my face, almost next to my face. It was so loud, it was so vivid. I jumped and I sat down on my bed and switched on the light straight away. I looked around the room. Obviously, there was nobody in the room. I couldn't hear my dad. There was silence. Nothing could make that sound. So I calmed down and eventually I tried to go to sleep again. I switched off the light, I closed my eyes, and almost immediately I could hear the same scratching on the wall, but quite persistent, literally next to me. Like a cat or something would be scratching, some kind of animal would scratch in the wall next to me. And again, I quickly sat up in the bed and I switched on the light. And I knew that there is something in the room, something that I cannot see. And I don't know what it is or who it is. But I know there is something there. I just cannot see it. So after sitting for about 5-6 minutes, I decided to attempt one more time to go to sleep. And again, I switched off the light. And guess what? The scratching continued. This time it was more persistent. It was more vivid. It was loud. It was literally next to me. Someone was trying to show me that they're also in my room. I don't know what they're doing there, but they are in my room. I couldn't take this anymore. I switched on the light and I was sitting there and I was thinking, how could I sleep that night? I couldn't go to speak to my dad because he was in his room sleeping already. And to be honest, I didn't even have that in my mind to go and tell parents anything about paranormal stuff. Maybe I felt like they wouldn't understand me. Saying that, years later, we were discussing many things with my parents and with my brother. And all of us were experiencing different paranormal or mystical things in the apartments where we lived. So that night, I just went to sleep with the light on. And I realized that whatever that is doesn't like the light. If you leave the light on, they don't disturb you anymore and you can go to sleep. But then you have to kind of cover your eyes with something to let you sleep. But that worked. Another thing which was happening in that apartment is that when I would come back from school, my routine involved doing a homework that I would get from school pretty much the same day, pretty much straight after school, as I would get back home. So I had a writing desk, which was pretty straight, and I would sit there and I would make my homework. Usually some kind of writing exercise or some kind of tasks, reading, writing. And at some point, I would want to go to the kitchen to drink some water or to have some tea or something like that, just to have a break. And every time I would come back to my desk, I would see that the pens and pencils were off the table. They would be on the floor. I would make sure that I would leave them on the surface where they couldn't just roll off the desk. They would be on the same place every time. But every time I would come back from my break back to the desk in my bedroom, the pens and pencils would be on the floor. It happened every day and every time and so regularly that eventually I got used to this phenomenon. And every time I would come back from the kitchen, I would say to myself, okay, don't sit down, go straight under the desk because all your pens and pencils are on the floor. Well, I wouldn't say to myself, I would think like that. And sure, I would go on the floor under the desk and all the pens and pencils are there. I wouldn't even question who was doing it. I knew that there is some kind of invisible presence, invisible being, ghost or whatever you want to call it. Someone was joking with me and constantly putting all the pens and pencils on the floor each time. And this is how I lived for a couple of years probably with this kind of phenomena. Another one is that we constantly had our teaspoons disappearing from apartment. I don't know if you had these paranormal experiences, then perhaps you've experienced that too. Certain objects just disappear. They might appear somewhere else and completely unexpectedly and in the place where you definitely didn't put them. Well, we had that with teaspoons. They were constantly disappearing. And our mom would ask us, me and my younger brother, what are you doing with teaspoons? They're constantly disappearing. Are you throwing them away after you eat some yogurt or something? And we would say, no, of course not. We'd never throw away teaspoons. But these things were happening. A few years later, my mom told me that there were many occasions where she would wake up because someone is tapping her on the shoulder. And she would be thinking that it's my dad is waking her up, but there wouldn't be anyone there. So clearly, there was something living in that apartment. The interesting thing that years later, when we became adults with my brother, both of us have very different lives and different lifestyles. We live in different countries. But the paranormal experiences followed us. And no matter where I lived, whether it's a rented Airbnb or hotel or rented apartment, I would experience various phenomena. What didn't help is that I was constantly looking into ways of how to increase my different like psychic abilities. When I got into that the interest in new age activities, like I'm telling about on my other videos, eventually mediumship and things like that. Of course, all that increased the activity in the houses where I lived. But the thing is, my brother, he also experienced these things. And at some point, years later, he said to me, I have something at home, but I'm not sure what it is. Something is disturbing my peace. So again, at that time, none of us practiced any spirituality in a sense of like protection or religion. Of course, we didn't practice religion. We were ethnic Muslims, but I mean Muslims by name, but none of us knew anything about Islam, really. None of us knew how to pray or how to protect house or ourselves. Nothing like that. So we lived just like disbelievers or non-believers, you can say. But we definitely believed in the ghosts, in the existence of ghosts or apparitions, or even something like out-of-body experiences, lucid dreaming and things like that. All that we've experienced, both of us. So at some point, I say to my brother, let me meditate and see if there is anything I can sense in your apartment. And when in my mind, I kind of went into his apartment and I started looking in his apartment, what I could perceive with my third eye. At that time, I felt it's a really great idea. I could see a little girl that lives in his apartment. And that girl was a ghost, basically, which he confirmed because not only him, but also his wife at the time, they both saw her, a glimpse of a little girl when they would be standing in the kitchen cooking. So the more I was involved into opening my intuitive abilities, you can say, the more of the stuff was happening at home, to the point where I could see someone in my bedroom at night, for example, or even someone on my bed at some point. But that was years later when I was developing my mediumistic skills. I'm telling you all this not to say that this is all worth exploring. Quite the opposite. I want to say that this stuff is real, for a start. The invisible world around us exists 100%. Many of us, I'm sure you also, many of you have seen it, have heard it, have felt it, or know many stories of other people who had various paranormal experiences. So that stuff is real. What also is real now, once I started learning these things from Islamic perspective, of course I stopped doing all kind of development and things like that, because I realized how many doors we open. The doors that lead to the unseen realm, that not necessarily to the place that is filled with angels and kind spirits. Quite on contrary, I noticed that there are many negative spirits around us. Maybe some of them neutral, I don't know. But from what I saw and witnessed, quite often they are troublemakers, to put it mildly. From the Islamic viewpoint, for example, we call them JINNS. You can say something demonic. I know that they are trying to disturb your peace. They are trying to get you through your dreams, through your vulnerable state, through hypnosis, if you are doing that, through deep meditation. They also can get in. Let's face it, most of us are not pure to the point where we are divinely protected 100%, that when we open these doors, we only greeted by angels. It's probably not the case. It's more like going to the center of some city and seeing all kind of people around us with all kind of intentions, right? Try to walk in a dark alley at night in the center of some big city, and you will see how eerie it can get, where you don't want to do any risky behavior. Like I remember like living even in London or going through Moscow at night. I would clutch my bag and I would walk very quickly if I have to walk at night. Same in Mexico, for example, in Mexico City. Some places you wouldn't even go to because you know there is a lot of crime happening there and you can be a target very quickly. So same is happening with those doors that we are so eager to open, especially like in New Age practices. Another thing I've realized that some of these beings, they can appear in a very nice way, and they kind of mix the truth with a falsehood. And these beings, which I saw later in shamanic ceremonies in Mexico, for example, they can actually start with a very nice words, nice phrases, like we are all connected, we are all consciousness, we are all love. But all these can lead to something which is, again, eerie and not so love and light anymore. There is a explanation in religions actually about that, where the devil or the shayateen, they deceive you, and then they can appear almost like angels to us. So the point is, you never know who you were talking to when you open those doors. For example, through Islamic lens, I can see that we know that we were created, not just us human beings here, but also we have those jinns, which are created from a smokeless fire. And there are, I don't know how many of them, probably millions or billions of them all around us, everywhere. And there are different types. Some of them, they live like in the mountains, and some live in the houses and abandoned buildings. Some of them prefer forests, and some of them live even underwater. Some of them are almost attached, not almost, but are attached to humans. For example, there is a belief that if you like to look in the mirror for a long time and you're probably undressed and admiring yourself for way too long, you're actually attracting attention of certain beings that you don't see, that are around us all the time. Because if you admire yourself to that point, and for a long time, someone who you don't see or something start admiring you too. And that happens, and then the attachment happens and things like that. So what I'm trying to say is that all these games that we are trying to create for us, especially when we're growing up as teenagers, and when we get our Ouija board or some other forms of communicating with spirits and things like that, because it all seems fascinating. All this can lead to the experiences that make your life disturbed. Having nightmares and having depressive moods and things like that, that's a result of this all. And the thing is, when I was learning about those different spirits, whether it's from New Age spirituality perspective or Islamic perspective or any other, basically these entities, they have free will as well. That's the main thing. And they choose what to do with their will. And they can kind of live by our side and not doing much to us, whether it's good or bad, or they can do quite bad things. With years and learning about all this, what I've realized is that what I saw and witnessed when I was growing up, that wasn't my imagination. That was my reality. Living through paranormal experiences is not that easy because your life is disturbed. I had nightmares all my life, and literally from everything I've tried. And I mean all different, like protecting your home with different objects or burning sage and playing certain music or anything like that that's supposed to protect your house. I can see that nothing really works. The only thing that worked 100% is when I came to Islam and I started using prayers. Personal and those that I would play at home. Those that you can find on YouTube, for example. They can clear your house. They really can. But that's considering you are not opening other doors around you all the time. Because it's a constant battle. The battle that is never ending between the dark and the light. Well, the curious thing is that at this point, something happened to my equipment. It stopped working. So perhaps it was genius interference. Now I'm gonna go and pray, and then I will put Surah Al-Baqarah, which you can find on YouTube. This powerful surah cleans your house. And if you have your own story to share, please write it in the comments below, and I would love to read it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in one of my next videos.